Draymond Green ripped the NBA and essentially the Cavs organization for how it's been treating its NBA players. And one of the things that I've always said is optics are extremely important. How we perceive players and how the players are perceived are extremely important. And I think that when you're evaluating situations, I like to take a non-parochial approach. I like to view the entire landscape through a periphery and not just a microscope, because I think that optics are extremely important. And I don't think more than any other sport, the NBA players, and especially stars in the NBA, care the most about their optics more than athletes in any other sport that I've seen. They're trying to draw fouls. Are they considered flopping? Their wardrobe is scrutinized highly sometimes. And we always look at, especially when it comes to NBA players, because they're so outspoken, we critique and analyze every word that they say, every minute detail of every pregame, postgame, conference, and remarks. That's what we do. Are they being opaque and equivocal? Are they being transparent and direct? If this is a star and they're disgruntled, how are they acting on it? Those are the questions that we ask and that we dissect when we're looking at NBA players all the time. And the latest example is with Andre Drummond. And one of the things that we've consistently done with NBA players is we admonish and scorn and shred some of these guys if we deem, as the media, as fans, as viewers, if we deem that they're not handling situations appropriately or as we would hope. Are the optics matching what we view to be appropriate in this situation? And the Cleveland Cavaliers basically just said, hey, Andre Drummond, we're shipping you, so we're going to intentionally sit you. Now, here's the thing. And this is where I love the comments from Draymond Green. Is here you've got a guy in Andre Drummond who hasn't been packing it in, who's been providing effort night in and night out. This is a guy that's been averaging 17 and a half points, 13 and a half rebounds per game. He's led the league in rebounding 4 times, including 3 straight seasons. He's second in the NBA in rebounds per game this year at 13 and a half. He's giving you effort night in and night out. He didn't ask to be sidelined. He didn't ask for that. The Cavaliers said, hey, we're trying to trade you, and we're concerned that your trade value is going to erode if we play you and you get injured and you get hurt. And we don't want to run that risk. Andre Drummond is a competitor. He wants to play. He wants to be out there. And you, as the organization, are depriving him of that. Here you have a guy in Andre Drummond who has never publicly complained. He's never publicly fussed. He's done his job. He's done it well. And so there's this double standard, of course, that exists. And when we look at optics, we always peer through it through the lens of the owners and the organization as opposed to peering through the lens of the player. That's what we do. You look at James Harden. He wanted out of Houston. That's obvious. We knew that. And he tried to make his intentions clear in the offseason prior to the start of the season that he wanted out. And he let the organization know. And instead, what the Rockets in turn did was forced him to play against his will. And as a consequence, he naturally dogged it, gained some weight, and we killed him for it. And yet, instead of the narrative shifting and being directed towards the Rockets organization for playing him when clearly he wanted out, you wanted him to have to deflect the aerial assault that was launched by the media for keeping him in there just to play and deal with this media airstrike. You left James Harden in there. And not once did we ever say, hey, how should we be feeling about James Harden? The question was, wow, why is James Harden doing this to the Rockets organization? And this really is a unfortunate situation for Steven Silas. The question always revolved around the organization and the ownership group, as opposed to, is this an ideal situation for James Harden? Is he being treated equitably and fairly right now? Because everyone's more concerned with how it will land with the Rockets. And here you have this guy in James Harden who's being forced against his will to play when the Rockets could have easily just sat him on the bench and had him wear street clothes or not show up at all, which is what they did with Andre Drummond. They just said he was warming up in the pregame, and they said, I want you to go back in the locker room, put on some clothes, and you're going to sit this one out because we're blatantly trying and attempting to trade you. You look at Anthony Davis 2 years ago. Yes, he wanted out of New Orleans. He made his intentions known privately, and he politely asked the organization to trade him. And it was the organization, was the Pelicans organization that said, the hell with that. We're going to make this a contentious relationship and make this a court of public opinion on you. And they forced Anthony Davis to play. But not only did they force Anthony Davis to play, they stripped him of his ability to play because they played him for one half, for a half of a game in practically the entire final 20 games of the season. And mind you, again, everyone was criticizing Anthony Davis. Oh, how could you want out of New Orleans? That was the narrative surrounding Anthony Davis. Instead, the question should have been, if you're the New Orleans Pelicans, why are you forcing this guy to play at all if you know he wants out, if you are engaged in trade talks? Because here you have a guy in Anthony Davis who's competing his tail off, and in the final 8 games, in 8 of the final 9 games for Anthony Davis as a New Orleans Pelican, the organization was hamstringing Alvin Gentry and only allowing him to play 21 minutes of action a night. And in 21 minutes of action a night for Anthony Davis, in 8 of the final 9 games, he was averaging nearly 18 points, 8.5 rebounds on 61% shooting in one half. Occasionally, if he was lucky, they would allow him to play in the third quarter. Never sniffed fourth quarter time. So that's an example of a player who respectfully wanted out, and you as the organization felt it was incumbent on you to drag this thing out, make this a contentious relationship, and involve the public. Anthony Davis never asked for that. You wanted him to play, and then midway through each game, you pulled him out. That's a PR nightmare that you induced on yourself. With Blake Griffin, we're seeing they publicly came out and just stated blatantly, we are suspending activity for Blake Griffin indefinitely until we trade him. That's what they're saying. And so these guys are competitors, and all they want to do is compete. That's why they love the game of basketball. One of my favorite idioms that's been coined about basketball, and it's predominantly used in basketball, though it's been used in other sports, is, and actually one of my favorite players, my favorite all-time player, Kobe Bryant, said in his animated short, he said, you asked for my hustle, I gave you my heart. This is what drives players. This is why players compete. It's for the love of the game. It's for the desire to win. And instead of the narrative being shifted towards the organization, it's always being directed at the players. And now I think the pendulum has swung and needs to swing in the other direction. Now what we have to start doing is having earnest discussions about How are you as the organization handling this situation? How are the optics for you? Not the player. The players don't have to worry about the optics anymore. This is about the organization. How are you handling this situation? Are you handling it appropriately? Are you providing support for the player? Are you deflecting the shrapnel of criticism that you know is going to be headed in their direction? What are you doing to ensure that this player feels comfortable and safe and is not a distraction in the locker room? That's the question that we need to start asking, because for the longest time, the questions have always been directed at the players, and the narrative has always been about the players being pouty and their unwillingness to be flexible and to try. And here I've laid out plenty of examples of guys that are wanting to try. And here you have a guy in Andre Drummond who is trying to play like an all-star for the Cleveland Cavaliers. He wants to be an all-star. Sure, he may privately want out of Cleveland, but he's not showing it. He's playing like he's trying to lead them to a championship. I understand that's not going to happen, and the organization views Jared Allen as the next step and as the bridge to this next kind of resurgence in Cleveland with their young core. But we can't keep blaming the players for these terrible optics sometimes, because this is an example in which the organization has let us down, not the players.